Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. This is a really exceptional blade. This is the CRKT Otanashi noh, designed by James Williams. You can see the name there as well as Williams' name and the same name in Japanese. I can't confirm that that's true for you, but that's what it seems to indicate. So there's the knife. Let's talk a little bit about the design first and the designer, James Williams. James Williams is sort of a modern-day samurai, very proficient with edged weapons, teaches, various branches of military and law enforcement about edged weapons, and so designs a knife with that kind of background in mind. And this knife in particular was a response to a request from SOCOM to come up with a blade that would be easily concealable, a folding knife that could be easily concealable, but when opened would be totally combat ready. And so this is a combat knife. And by the way, I'm going to use that phrase instead of tactical because I just think it's more appropriate. So this is a combat design, a knife designed for combat, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that actually makes it a pretty good everyday carry knife, with some exceptions. And I'll try to point those things out so that you can kind of have a good idea of whether or not this knife would work for you or not, whether or not you'd be interested in it. So let's get into size and weight. By the way, I want to say one more thing. Some of that design philosophy makes the knife look a little different. You don't see a lot of folding knives like this. In fact, it puts me in mind of an OTF knife. You can almost imagine looking at this, that there ought to be a switch here that you could, extract pull the blade back into the handle or extend it out. Maybe this would be a knife that if you really like OTFs and you like that shape and that style, you could own this knife and it would be totally legal, even though it kind of has that feel of an OTF. So let's get into size and weight now that you kind of know the designer, you know the background. This is 10 1/8 inches overall, 5.5 inch handle, 4 5/8 inch blade. It weighs in at 6.3 ounces, which is a little heavy, but remember, you've got a big knife here. This is, full 10 inches and a little over 10 inches. So, when you talk about weight to size ratio, it's not that unreasonable to have an over 6 ounce blade. You should notice that one of the things that's neat about this knife is although it's big, and by the way, it feels very hefty. It looks kind of slight, kind of slim, but in hand and when you start using it, you get the very distinct impression that this is a very heavily built, very strong folding knife. That said, you're getting that strength and that size, that full big 10-inch knife, in a package that when closed is quite compact, okay? When you have this in your pocket, it carries really lightly, and that's because of two things. One is this dimension. It's very thin, barely over 3/8 of an inch, and this dimension here, it's quite slender. And so this knife actually carries in pocket better than a lot of knives that I own that are much shorter. A lot of 8-inch knives that I have, a lot of 9-inch knives that I have take up more space in my pocket than this because it folds down, one, totally into the handle, and two, into such a slim package in both dimensions. And so that's actually pretty cool, I think, about this knife, that you can carry a fairly substantial blade in a pretty small package. And you guys know I like that when you get a lot of blade in a very small package. The blade itself, let's go into that next, and here's the influence of James Williams again, is a traditional Japanese tanto. And that's kind of cool, right? Because we don't see that very often. If you look for an American tanto, like every knife ever made seems to come in, that blade option. You can order this knife in a tanto style blade. Well, this actually is a tanto style blade, a traditional Japanese tanto style blade. It's designed for penetration, and you can see that long slender shape is going to be very appropriate for pushing into some kind of substrate. And I did a bunch of testing on cardboard. By the way, this is a plus. The finish on this is actually pretty tough. I've stabbed this thing into cardboard any number of times, and the finish is still very, very good. I also cut some wood and some other stuff just to get a sense for how it cuts. And since we're talking about the blade, I will say it cuts everything that I cut with it. It cut pretty well, with one exception, and that is it's not great for food prep. The blade shape is just not very effective at cutting vegetables and those kinds of things. I know it's not meant for that, but it is nice. I test knives that way because it's nice to know that if you've got this knife in your pocket, you want to peel an apple or cut a tomato or whatever, you can do it. This will do it, just not well. Okay, so you kind of need to know that. The other thing you should know is this is a thick piece of Aussate steel, which is nice because it makes it strong, it makes it hardy, but because of that thickness and because this dimension is quite small, you have a pretty steep grind angle. Okay, so this angle here is quite abrupt. And so when you're cutting into something, unless you're using the very end of the blade, it cuts. There's a bit of resistance there. You got a lot of wedge action. So that's the knife blade. It is very effective. It's really, really cool. One of the things that this knife really has going for it is a very different blade shape. By the way, deployment is by a thumb plate rather than thumb studs, and that's kind of key to this design, because if these were thumb studs, it wouldn't be able to fold up like this. It would have to, the blade would have to be out here somewhere to allow for room for those thumb studs, but the plate lets you get this in a very small package. Now, let's carry on into the handle. The first thing is it does have the locks system. That's the LAWX system from CRKT, so that when it's open, you flick that switch and now you can't disengage the lock. That is a safety feature, and I've noticed it on a lot of knives that are designed for military application or law enforcement application, and I wonder if maybe there's some stipulation in the requirements for a folding knife that they have to have that safety lock feature on them, because I've seen a lot of knives for that purpose that have that feature. It's not my favorite feature, and I'll be honest, outside of demonstrating for you in this video, I barely ever use this, okay? It also has the washer here to stop that over travel so that you can't bend this lock bar over too far and ruin the knife. So that's a nice feature. It probably adds a little bit of weight, and as I say, when you look at this knife for what you're getting, you can sort of see where 6 ounces comes from. Okay, this is all stainless steel, and so here's the frame lock side. This side is all G10. You have a back spacer. You've got this big blade, and then you've got all this hardware going on around the pivot. The pivot is a Torx bit, and that'll allow us to move kind of into the rest of the handle. The rest of the handle is actually very, very ergonomic, and the design of this handle is meant to be comfortable and usable in any position you could think of, whether it be, you know, this way, this way, this way, you know, whatever you want to do with this knife, you know, choke up. By the way, the thumb plate, I mean the thumb plate does make a nice place to put your thumb when you're in a choked up position on the blade. There is jimping here as well, very functional jimping, by the way, so that you can kind of choke down on the knife. So the handle is actually really, really nice. And if you're one of the people who wants to do, if you're a practitioner of some Japanese art, that martial art that involves knives, this is a great option. The balance on this knife is phenomenal. You can move it around probably better than any other knife that I own. It's just very, very nicely put together in terms of where the whole weight distribution falls. Very, very good for that combat style motion that you may have to do. And of course, it's designed for that, right? So we would kind of expect that. The G10 is grippy, and I do really like it. As I said, you know, whatever position you want, it works really, really well. Now, the pocket clip is very well put together. It's, I'll let you kind of see close up. You can see how this just kind of bends over, and there's a little slot here, making it really easy to just take that screw out, flip it the other way, and put it back on. And so you could reverse this very, very easily. Now, there is one warning I would say. In this configuration, it goes in and out of pocket really, really nicely. If you move this over, now the pocket clip is going to be on the G10, and at least one reviewer that I saw complained about that being a little grippy. on your pocket, trying to get it in and out all the time. So that's most of what I need to say about this knife. I've got to give my overall impressions next, and overall I actually really enjoy this blade. It's really cool. It has a ton of style. It has a ton of, you know, just essence. Oh, by the way, hold on. One complaint that I do have to offer, in addition to, you know, on a practical note, this is a big knife, okay? If you are going to try to EDC this, I would say it carries fine. It's no problem in pocket, but it's out of pocket where you may have a little bit of an issue, because, you know, if you get an envelope delivered to your desk at the office and you pull this out to open it, your coworkers might look twice. Okay, you know, if you're working in a warehouse and you got to cut straps off of a bundle or something, and you pull this out, again, people might go, "Whoa, buddy." And so there's a practical note there. So that's one of the things that you're probably going to want to consider. Now, I want to show you this. You see this little cutout here in the bottom of the blade. That cutout is designed so that when you're sharpening the knife, you can sharpen it right to the very bottom of the blade. And then that little cutout is sort of where that sharp edge, the secondary bevel, should terminate. As you can see, they didn't take that secondary bevel, the sharpened edge, all the way to the bottom here, even though they specifically put the little cut in to allow for that. So that's kind of annoying. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't affect the functioning of the knife in any way. It's just a minor fit and finish detail that could have been just a little bit better. As I said before, it does most EDC tasks pretty well. Not perfectly, because as I pointed out, you know, you've got a pretty sharp angle here, pretty abrupt. But one workaround for that is to use the end of the knife where it never does get that thick. So you can use this last portion of the knife as almost like a scalpel, and will do most of those finer jobs for you pretty well. I've carried this knife quite a bit, and I have no problem carrying it. There hasn't been any task other than trying to cut up some fruit the other day that I thought, yeah, this knife is not doing that great cutting up fruit. I mean, it did it. Any knife will cut a piece of fruit, but it didn't do a very good job. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't a nice slicer that way. But every other EDC task that I've done with it, and I've done lots of things with it, I've had no problems at all. Okay, so overall, I really, really like this knife. It's a cool, cool knife to have in your collection. You know, I really, really like the style of this knife. I like the different blade shape. And again, this is one of the things I said in the CRKT video. I like CRKT because they have some boldness about that. You may be interested, if you like this knife, in looking at the Hisatsu or a few other James Williams designs from CRKT. You can go on their website and check that out. He has, I think, 6 knives. I could be wrong. It might be 8 knives. But I think there's 3 folders and 3 fixed blades that James Williams has designed for CRKT. And you may want to check that out if you're really into that Japanese style of blade. So there's my impressions on the Otanashi noh Ken. With some qualifications, it's a good fit. It's a good EDC knife. You may want to pair it with a smaller knife that you can pull out. You may want to, you know, whatever you want to do with it. It is, of course, to be remembered that this is a combat knife. That's what it was designed for. And so if it doesn't do some EDC tasks perfectly, we can't complain about that because it wasn't designed to do that. I have found that it actually performs quite well in all of the things that I have asked it to do. And so I've been very, very pleased with this knife. I'm really excited to have it as part of my collection. I think it's very, very cool. And I find myself often, you know, kind of rolling it and moving it in my hand because that balance is just so, so perfect. So there you go. That's my take on the Otanashi noh Ken. If you're still watching, if you watched the last video, there's a couple things that I just didn't like the flow of it, and there was a couple things I wanted to say that I missed. And by the way, even in this video, I did the same thing. The washers are Teflon and bronze on one side and the other. So you can kind of, I don't know if I'll be able to get that on camera. You might be able to see. You can see there the bottom one from camera's perspective, the bottom one is bronze, the top one is Teflon. I'm not totally crazy about Teflon washers, but it's not the end of the world. Still a very tough, very functional knife. I'm really, really pleased with it. And if you like that style of knife, I think you'll be very pleased as well. There you go. Hope you liked the video, and we'll talk to you later.